Thank you, Mr Speaker. The ACT Party will be supporting this bill at the second reading, and I'm proud to say that I was a member of the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee which considered the submissions on this bill and deliberated the SOP put up by the Minister. As the Minister explained, the fundamental objective of this bill is to create greater retail competition, and particularly in the South Island. And there are 3 or 4 key things that this bill provides. First of all, what it does, it provides for the transfer of the ownership of the Tekapo A and B power stations on the Waitaki River from Meridian to Genesis. Secondly, it provides for a swap market, or a virtual asset swap if you like, to provide forward electricity contracts for a further 15 years, or 15 years from the bill coming into effect. And thirdly, it makes it easier for lines companies to compete at the retail level. But what I'd like to do, Mr Speaker, is actually to perhaps step back and try and briefly explain for the House the structure of New Zealand's electricity market, because it was not something that I understood well before I came to Parliament, and as I have travelled around the country speaking on the issue of electricity prices, it's been very obvious to me that New Zealanders also don't understand how the electricity market works. And I guess in a way I'm going to repeat part of what Kennedy Graham has just said. But New Zealand has 5 major electricity generators, 5 major generators, and they're all different, Mr Speaker. Of those 5, 3 are owned by the state, the taxpayer, they're SOEs, and 2 are privately owned. Mr Speaker, of those 3 SOEs, those companies are Mighty River Power, Genesis Energy and Meridian. And I guess the makeup of those companies is fundamental to this bill, which I think it's why it's important to actually understand what those companies are and where they operate. Well, Mighty River Power is a company that's based substantially in the North Island. It generates electricity from power stations, hydro stations on the Waikato River, and the geothermal stations around Taupo. So look on Mighty River as being a North Island power station, and 90% of what it produces is renewable. Only 10% is generated from coal and gas, or in fact gas at the South Down generation plant in Auckland. Compare that then with Genesis. Genesis is a company that substantially has its major asset is the Huntly power station, and it generates electricity from coal and gas burnt at Huntly. 75% of what Genesis produce comes from the Huntly power station, and up until quite recently, most of what Genesis sold, it sold in the North Island. So it was a North Island retailer, just like Mighty River was, and in recent times Genesis has moved into the South Island. The Minister referred to increasing competition by Genesis into Christchurch and Dunedin and Queenstown, and that competition has come ahead of this bill. Genesis has anticipated this Parliament will pass this bill. And then the third power station, Mr Speaker, is Meridian. Meridian is mainly, in fact, it's 100% renewable. It's 100% renewable. It generates electricity from the hydro stations in the South Island rivers, the Waitaki in particular, and some renewable and particularly wind stations in Wellington at Macra, the West Wind Station, and also up in the Manawatu. So there you have 3 government-owned power stations. Mighty River Power, 90% renewable in the North Island, Meridian, 100% renewable in the South Island, and Genesis essentially a non-renewable station. Add to that Contact Energy. It came out of the old New Zealand Electricity Commission, if you like, privatised, sold off by the government, and Trustpower. So there's 2 privately owned stations and 3 government-owned stations. And what this bill is doing, this bill is transferring the ownership of 2 power stations on the Waitaki River, currently owned by Meridian, to Genesis. So this will give Genesis, the North Island-owned power station, or the mainly North Island power station, 2 power stations on the Waitaki River. It will give it South Island generation capacity and will make it much easier for Genesis to retail electricity in the South Island. And in expectation that this Parliament would pass this bill, as I said, Genesis has gone into Christchurch and Dunedin and to Queenstown and has aggressively sought customers, has underpriced, if you like, the market, gone in there and competitively bid for customers by offering cheaper prices, and Contact is a major supplier of electricity in Christchurch and Dunedin, and it's seen its market share undercut by Genesis coming in and anticipating this bill being passed. Sir, what I don't think New Zealanders fully appreciate, however, and Mr Graham referred to it, is that the wholesale price for electricity is set every half hour. Every half hour, 48 times a day, the generators conduct a computer auction against themselves or against other retailers, and those generators offer electricity into the market. And so 48 times a day, you've got a generator saying, I'm prepared to supply this amount of electricity at this price. For a higher price, I will produce more, and for an even higher price, I'll produce more. And it is the balance between the retailers demanding the electricity and the generators offering to supply it that sets the market price. And once that market price is set, Mr Speaker, that is the price that all the generators receive. So you may be, for example, Meridian offering to supply electricity at 6 or 7 cents a unit, a kilowatt hour, and you could be Genesis generating electricity from imported coal from Indonesia, and if the price that Genesis offers for electricity for the market is 10 cents a unit, and that electricity is demanded by the market, 10 cents is the price. 10 cents is the price that all generators get. Now, Mr Speaker, I found it very interesting that the Labour Party in particular focused on electricity prices. We heard Manaia...
Sorry to interrupt the honourable member, but the time has come for me to leave the chair for the dinner break. This debate is interrupted. I shall resume the chair at 7:30.